Welcome to the Powell-Liberty Historical Society's September 2023 program. This program is being pre-recorded and will be available later on our website, powellhistory.org. Today we have with us Linda Foster, a retired teacher and a history buff. And she's done several programs for us before. She takes a topic of interest to her, does a lot of research, and then she shares it with others. As a retired librarian myself for 30 years, I'm really excited about today's topic, Libraries on Horseback, the real story of the book woman of Troublesome Creek. I think many of you may have already read the popular fiction books about this program. It happened back during the Depression. It was a part of the WPA, Work Progress Administration, from 1935 to 1943. And women in the Appalachian areas were paid to deliver books on horseback because everything was so hilly and remote, and they ran into quite a lot of difficulties. So we're anxious to learn more about this program. I'll turn it over to Linda now.
Well, she said, The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek. I read this book. It was recommended by a friend of mine, a gal that I grew up with. And I just fell in love with this woman and this job that they had. And so I started research on it. And there's a picture of the actual book women of Troublesome Creek, or book women. I don't know that they're necessarily from Troublesome Creek. So they were horseback librarians. And many of us think of librarians as just people that take care of the books. They put them back on the shelves and tell you, shh, you can't talk. Well, librarians are a very determined group. And one librarian was very determined. But I want to know what your first library experience was.
When I was young, my dad would take us to the library on Tuesday nights when my mother had bridge club. And I just loved the library there because it had been a former mansion that a woman donated to the city of Troy, my hometown. And in a way, some of the rooms didn't make the best for a library, but ever since then, I would go to the library on my own too. As a teenager, I'd walk there, and so.
And it definitely made an impression because you became a librarian.
It was very influential.
Yeah.
I even got married in the mansion that was the library.
Okay.
It had moved, but they had a beautiful courtyard, and I went back to my hometown and was married in the courtyard of the.
What a great memory. So, anybody else?
We lived in Hilliard back in the late 50s, early 60s. And we had a bookmobile that would be coming around. And my mom would take us she would get some kind of report saying that there was going to be a bookmobile. And she would take us kids. And it was so neat to get on that bus and have all those choices of looking for books.
So you had a library on wheels?
Yes. Mine was on wheels.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm from a small town in Illinois, and that was my swimming pool and library. So I'd go to the library once a week. I had to walk 3 miles and then get 3 or 4 or 5 books, take them home, read them, go back the next week. So it was very much a part of my life during my high school years.
So anybody else have access to an actual library building? Linda?
Well, sort of. The library that I used to go to as a child was in a school, actually in a middle school. So I would be able to stop after school. Or if I went on a Saturday, my mother would have to take me. It was a big red letter day, but I was able to walk on my own on a Saturday to the library.
Well, I come from a family of readers, and so books were very important, but that was my first library. It was in my granddad's front room, and it's now in my house. I've inherited that, and I have different books in it. But my next question is, when you went to the library, what books or what kind of books did you like to check out?
Mine was dog stories.
Mine too.
Well,
And then horse stories.
mine was mostly dogs.
Oh,
I read all the Nancy Drew mysteries
okay.
in grade school, later grade school.
Okay.
I was fascinated by Dr. Dolittle,
Ah, okay.
and I rode my own bike to the library a distance of about a mile in Chicago.
Oh, right in Chicago?
Yes.
Okay. Some of those books in there are ones that I read as a child. How many of you read Heidi? Any of you read? Okay. And I don't know how many times I read it, and I cried every time because, you know. And Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates. I don't know if any of you ever heard of that one. Oh, and that's another one I read many times and cried every time too. So you'd think I'd quit reading if I keep crying all the books. But well, you mentioned a bookmobile. And the first bookmobile was in 1905. And this librarian in Washington County in Maryland was very upset because 50% of her residents were in remote areas and did not have access to books. So she designed the first bookmobile. And it was a wagon drawn by Black Beauty and Dandy, and it had about 200 books. And here is a book about her that I just fell in love with this book. I shouldn't be buying books, but I still am. And it tells about her life, and it's just done in a unique way that I think kids would enjoy looking at and seeing, and learning about her life. So that's a book that I recommend. Well, I also went to a bookmobile, and it parked in front of my granddad's house. And they went in and had lunch with my granddad, and I got to go out to the bookmobile and spend time just looking through the books and picking out what I wanted. She said, I read all the dog books, all the horse books, and all the ballerina books. And bookmobiles are still around today. They might not look the same, but they are still around. But if you lived in Eastern Kentucky in 1935, you probably didn't have access to a bookmobile or to a library. So you might have gotten your books from a pack horse librarian. So this idea started in 1896, and notice how prominent women are in providing books. And that's another thing that I find myself reading books that have very strong women characters in them. Book clubs started it, and you can look at the terrain there and you can see why that people didn't drive to the library. It was a pretty rough countryside. So a lady named May Stafford created the first pack horse library, and it started in 1913 in Kentucky. And it was supported by a coal baron, but unfortunately he died the next year, and so the program ended. But a seed was planted. Berea College sent books in horse-drawn wagons. So, and we know where they got their idea, from the lady in Maryland. And then Elizabeth Fullerton took Stafford's idea and asked a Presbyterian minister if they could use his library. And so that was how people got access for a while. So if you lived in eastern Kentucky, 40% of the population was illiterate. That's just hard to believe in 1930. But 63 counties had no library, and a lot of poverty due to the closing of the coal mines. And a second book about the pack horse librarian is this Giver of Stars, and it does talk about the coal mining problems too. So that might be another book that you would enjoy reading. But they knew that literacy would be a way to get out of poverty. The other thing that amazed me, 1 book per person in 1935 in Kentucky, where in the rest of the states, it was 5 to 10 books per person. And I should have looked up what the rate is now of how many books per person the libraries, because I'm sure, I hope it's more than 10. In 1935, the WPA took over, and Ellen Woodward headed the program, and she was the second highest ranking woman in FDR's administration. I didn't find out who the first was, but I'm going to say Eleanor was probably up there pretty high because she also helped set up the program. The big thing was the WPA was looking for jobs that were suitable for women. And so they thought they could be librarians. Now, when you think about what they had to ride through, the conditions they had to ride through, and all they had to do, they were pretty tough ladies. So, up there is a picture of one of the libraries, because each community was responsible for having some place to house the books. And so there is one of the special libraries. And I think you could probably have 1 person at a time in to look for books there. The program ran from 1935 to 1943. And PTAs, Women's Club, the DAR, they helped raise money for the books because they were not given money to buy books. They had to provide their own books. And a lady set up a penny fund where the children in schools would bring in a penny, and then they would accumulate as much as they could, and then they would buy books with those. They rotated the books between locations to get the most out of the books that they had. In 1936, 33,000 books circulated to 57,000 families. Isn't that amazing? I think that's fantastic. But you had to take care of these books because you couldn't just run down to Target or Barnes & Noble and pick up a new book. First of all, there wasn't one, and probably you didn't have the money to do it. And so each book came with a bookmark so that you didn't dog-ear the pages like I did, so that we could keep the books as fresh and clean as possible. And of course, they made their own bookmarks. For adults, well, they were interested in current events, history, religion, biographies, and men liked popular mechanics. Now, we think books, but they also circulated magazines, brochures, pamphlets, any kind of reading material that they could get a hold of. That's what they would circulate. So it was very diverse. Women requested Women's Home Companion and Ladies' Home Journal, but you could not have any thriller magazines or detective stories. So all of you that like those murder mysteries, you just wouldn't be able to get them. Of course, the Bible was probably the most popular, and it was often used by the librarians as a way to encourage people to read, that they would teach them to read from the Bible. And 1.5 million people were served. They focused on the children because they knew that it was important for them to have the ability to read. Robinson Crusoe, Rebecca's Sunnybook Farm, Gulliver's Travels were big favorites. Did any of you read any of those when you were?
Robinson Crusoe.
Okay. And picture books. And in those days, there weren't a lot of picture books for kids. So finding picture books for kids would have been a real trick. Poetry was requested, and Child's Garden of Verses was one of the ones, and that did have some illustrations in. Do you remember any picture books that you had early on?
The Runaway Bunny.
Okay, which was probably a golden book.
I think so, yeah.
I picture Charlotte's Web with drawings.
Yeah.
Photos. With
Right.
drawings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did any of you have the Pokey Little Puppy?
Oh, yeah, I had, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
ones
yeah.
I remember. Yeah. So
Right.
many of the people that did the illustrations for golden books became well-known illustrators then for other books. So, and you can see that the children are all anxious to welcome her to the school there. So if you were a librarian, you got paid $28 a month. And remember, many of these ladies were the sole support of their family for $28 a month. In today's money, that would be about $495. They had to carry about 100 books. They had to provide their own horse or mule. And so if you didn't own one, you could rent one from a neighbor, and that also cut into your salary. And they visited families and schools. And I want you to notice that the women in the top there, they don't have on long pants or anything. They are in dresses. So many of these women did this job in a dress and probably shoes that had some kind of a heel on it. Well, many of the women, their husbands had left home because of the Depression and the closing of the school mines. They had a 100 to 120 mile route, and they had to cover it twice a month. And so that meant that they had to cover about 18 to 20 miles a day. They gave reading lessons, or they would read aloud to families and schools. So they also had the job of teaching these people to read. And there they are in their dresses again. Now, they used everything. When a book or magazine got too tattered and torn or whatever, they would make a scrapbook. And they would cut up the old magazines, or they would get recipes or quilt patterns or things like that from the people that they served. And over 2,500 scrapbooks were created and circulated. And we talk about recipes in the scrapbooks. And so we have a special recipe to share with you. Thanks for bringing your mom's recipe box.
Yes, my mom was a wonderful cook and taught me so much about cooking.
Well, my mother didn't have me do much in the kitchen, just fix the salad or stir the gravy.
Must have been interesting when you got married.
Oh yes, my first grocery shopping trip was quite an experience. I remember Mother telling friends how she made this cake or that pie from scratch. So that was at the top of my shopping list. I went to the baking items aisle, but all I found was flour, sugar, corn starch, but no scratch. I was pretty sure it would not be with the meat or the pickles, so I finally asked a clerk where I would find scratch. Well, he looked somewhat puzzled, and then he told me to go to the store at the corner of College and Otterbein.
Did you find it there?
Yes, it was a feed store, which I found a little odd, especially when the clerk asked how many chickens I had and said it only came in 20-pound bags. But then I remember Mother proudly sharing her recipe for chicken casserole, and she said that she had made it from scratch. So I bought 20 pounds and headed home to find a recipe.
Did you find a recipe?
Unfortunately, no. I read my new Better Homes and Gardens cookbook from cover to cover, but no luck. Then I tried the library. No luck there.
What did you do?
Well, I had my doubts when I opened the bag. How could fluffy, moist cakes come from such hard, dry-looking ingredients? I decided that the use of heat and adding liquids must bring about a big change.
Did you ask anyone else?
Oh, well, I wanted to do my part, so I chose not to consult my new husband. He had volunteered to take over the cooking after I complimented a chocolate cake that he had said that he had made from scratch.
So what did you do?
Well, by now it seemed like everywhere I went, a friend would tell me how they had made muffins from scratch, pancakes from scratch, even lemon pudding from scratch. And I decided that if they could do it, I could do it too.
I admire your determination.
Well, I kept my problem to myself and I kept my bag of scratch in the closet. I became even more confused when one of our male friends told us that he had made their dining room table from scratch. And then another friend showed me a beautiful dress that she had made from scratch.
Oh, that would get confusing.
Well, I was too proud to give up. If paper can be made from trees and glue from horses' hooves, maybe wood and cloth can be made from scratch.
So what was your next strategy?
Well, I knew my husband made things from scratch, even if I couldn't find where he kept it. So I asked him to teach me how to bake a cake. And I watched him very carefully. He used flour, eggs, sugar, milk, but no scratch. So later on, as we were eating cake, I very casually asked him, "Honey, why don't we raise some chickens?"
I love it.
So the people in Appalachia also had to provide their own entertainment, and so we gave you a sample of their entertainment. And so there are some examples of their scrapbooks. And there are even workshops that can be done with these scrapbooks. If you go online, there's a lot of information about the pack horse librarians and things that they have done, and where you can find some of the books and scrapbooks. So when you think over 2,500 of these were made, and you can see they weren't necessarily a thing of beauty, but they were reading material that they could have. And I'm sure that the children enjoyed seeing pictures of children reading. And you could work with identifying birds and flowers and things like that. So what is the legacy of the pack horse librarians? Well, women's involvement in literacy. 48 counties were served in Kentucky. 1.5 million people were served. Bookmobiles then began serving rural areas. And in 2014, Kentucky had 75 bookmobiles. Then we have Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. And in Ohio, a friend of mine has started the Mary Jean Loveday Literacy Program as part of the Foundation for Appalachian, Ohio. So people are still working on that. And it might not necessarily be books now, because as we found out during COVID, the people of Appalachia don't have the access to the internet. And so that was one area where people had to work to get information to people. So some of the books you might want to read, I've shown you The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, The Library on Wheels, and here's a short nonfiction about down Cut-Shin Creek. And here's a children's book about that bookwoman, which you might want to look at. And there's also another one along the storied trail, which is also about the pack horse librarians. Bookmobiles today. Well, they even have a bookmobile day, and it was celebrated in April. And they come in many different forms, but they're still a popular method for delivering books all over the world. And you can see how they've made them very eye-appealing, and lots of books for kids, lots of places for kids to sit in them. So do you have any questions or comments or concerns? Or
Did the program end in 1945 because of the end of the war?
I think how long did the WPA continue? I think basically they discontinued the WPA because of the war, I think. So, and bookmobiles were becoming more accessible to people, I think.
So what it amounted to is that the money dried up when the WPA went out, so that the local communities would have had to.
Probably.
I remember when I was working at the Bexley Library, and we had gotten requests from some small libraries in southern Ohio that had been flooded because you're down there and they had quite a lot of floods. And we would pack up some of our older used books and mail them down there. So probably things like that, these small libraries.
So was it like more of a donation? You didn't have to charge, you didn't charge them or
Oh,
anything?
no.
Okay.
No.
I had read a book on the topic called Light to the Hills, which I thought was an interesting, taking enlightenment to the hills.
I read that one
Did
too.
you? Yes, I loved it.
Oh.
Yes, but the novel story emphasized how vulnerable those women were to the weather. They were riding with all these valuables on their horses and sometimes were accosted. And it's not like they went home at night. They're miles from home and staying who knows where. Boy, my hat's off to them.
Yeah, they were very
I
determined.
remember the scene in the Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek where she was on a mule and there was a huge snake. And it came and it scared her. I think it threw her off her horse and things like that, besides flooded creeks and
All kinds of weather, rain and snow and cold. I mean, I know it talked in here about how one time she was so cold, and
sometimes some of those men, especially in families, they really didn't want to have their children learn to read, or they weren't interested in having this program. And sometimes I think they would get out a gun and kind of scare the librarians off.
I wouldn't be surprised.
They didn't like their wives doing this.
no.
Right.
I want them to get smarter.
Right.
You know, this is a fiction book, but she's taken two different facts and
The author there or Michelle
Richardson,
I
Kim
was
Michelle
gonna say
Richardson,
Michelle,
yeah.
Yeah, but she actually grew up in the Appalachian area, and
Yeah.
she knew a lot about the history of that program. I think even it's in the back of that one, or she's read several of them.
Yeah, it's,
And she has photos and a lot
Yeah.
of bibliography.
yeah.
More.
There's her picture, it doesn't, just her acknowledgements. There's some, there's an interview with her, conversation with the author. But, well, here are photos, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think she continued the series with the daughter.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
woman's daughter.
The woman's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about these books until we talked about this program. I'd heard about the librarians on horseback, but not the books. And I've since read most of them, so.
I got really interested, I think it was maybe about that same time, a couple of years ago after I read the book. I was curious about what it was like here in Powell for people to get access to libraries, because I used the Powell Library down here on South-Liberty, and it had just been built in '93. And so I interviewed some of the ladies that live here, Marge Bennett, who's been a founder and member of the Historical Society. And she remembered a bookmobile that would come to the Powell School. And also her daughter, Marge's daughter, Sherry Carmichael, she remembered the Powell School, her class, the teacher there, encouraged kids to buy some books. They raised money with book sales, with cake or bake sales. And
From scratch.
They started,
Yeah.
they would go downtown and buy some books, and then they started their own classroom library there.
I'd like to know if it existed in my hometown, which is in rural upstate New York. I don't know who to ask anymore. That generation has left us, but I'm gonna try to find out.
I couldn't find anything other than, the ones in Kentucky, and maybe that.
Probably just benefited from the bookmobiles as a result of these ladies who. Well, thank you, Linda.
Well, you are quite welcome. So,
Appreciate it. It was interesting.
so hopefully you'll get one of the books and read it.